a face only a mother could love, and a tailless whip scorpion. Hello tarantula lovers, I'm Alex and you're watching Tarantula Haven. Today's subject is the tailless whip scorpion. Now you may have heard them referred to as cave spiders or whip spiders, but I believe the most common term that you usually hear is tailless whip scorpion. And I am offering a retraction, actually 2 retractions in this video, because in not the last video, but the one prior to that on my Repticon video, I had purchased a couple of tailless whip scorpions, and in that video I said that they are not scorpions and that they are not spiders, and then my mouth ran away from me and I said that they are not arachnids. Now, the first retraction is that they are arachnids and they belong to the family Amblypygae or amblypygids, and they're a very unique type of creature, and there are lots and lots of different species out there all over the world. So I'm going to talk about a couple of them here in this video and kind of make up for my disinformation that I put out there and put out some good information, because the more I learn about them, the more I seem to find out, and the more I find that there's not a whole lot of information out there on them. So I had a really difficult time digging up information, and I'm going to tell you right now, I am not an expert. I am learning as I'm going here, so I am kind of passing out on information that I've learned and picked up about them as I go along as well. So that is the purpose of all my videos, is to pass on good information, and I don't want to be the one passing out misinformation. So allow me to correct myself and allow me to give you some very good, useful information about them so that you can take that and run with it. So one of the things that I seem to encounter is that there isn't tons and tons of information out there on tailless whip scorpions. Now, tarantulas seem to be a little bit more ingrained in the hobby, and there's more and more information getting out there. But as far as the Amblypygae, there really isn't tons and tons out there. There are a few very useful YouTube videos. There's also some very valid information on, say, the Arachnid boards and other websites and things like that. Some of it is very technical. So that's kind of the reason why I'm making this video, is to kind of help clear up a little bit of information. And it reminds me a lot of, say, the Asian forest scorpion. For example, when you buy them, say at a reptile show, if you buy them at a Petco or something to that effect, a lot of times they're labeled as Asian forest scorpion, but they don't exactly tell you what species they are. Now, if you intend to keep them, if you intend to breed them or anything like that, it's kind of important to know that information. And there are a few species of Asian forest scorpion that can be called that. You have probably the most common, which is Heterometrus spinifer, and then you have Heterometrus longimanus, and then you have Heterometrus petersii. So all those different scorpions can all be considered Asian forest scorpions. So sometimes those things get intermingled and you don't really know what you have. I've even bought an emperor scorpion, which is from a completely different place in Africa, and it was sold to me as an Asian forest scorpion. So, you know, that just adds to the confusion. So when it comes to the tailless whip scorpion, you're not gonna find these at your Petco or anything like that, at least not yet, because they haven't become that popular in the pet trade. But as far as hobbyists that are into tarantulas and things like that, a lot of people are starting to get into them or have been into them for a long time, but the same thing seems to happen. Now, most of the species that people are looking for or they want are the big giant ones, right? And those tend to come from Tanzania, Kenya, and so on. And just like that, you have your 3 main species that most people are getting in the hobby. The most commonly sold ones. So I want to clear up a little bit of that because it could be difficult to identify them. They look very close to each other, and you could end up with the same situation like I did, where you buy it and it's sold to you as a Tanzanian tailless whip scorpion, but you don't know exactly what species it is. Here's a perfect example. I bought this tailless whip scorpion through a Repticon, and it was sold to me as a Tanzanian tailless whip scorpion, or a giant Tanzanian tailless whip scorpion. So here's what it looks like. And when I got home, now admittedly it was kind of an impulse buy, but I was looking for them because I told myself if I ever see one of those, I'm getting it. And I didn't really know that much about them, but I figured I could look it up because that's kind of what we do with, our impulse buys. If you research it, if you find out, you'll know how to take care of it and you should be pretty good to go. So anyway, I bought this one and I brought it home, and it was a giant tailless whip scorpion, or giant Tanzanian tailless whip scorpion. But what I did not know when I did a search for giant Tanzanian tailless whip scorpion is that there are a few species of giant Tanzanian tailless whip scorpion. So I started having to research and find out exactly what species I had, because I bought two of them. Now, much to my sorrow, I ended up putting them together. One had recently molted and it was a little bit smaller than this one, and this one ate it. So it didn't even last me a whole day. The next day, all I found was the carcass and it had eaten it. So anyway, I have this one remaining, and this one is a female, and we'll get into the differences between males and females. But I didn't know what I had on my hands, so I had to make sure, because somebody told me that this species that they thought it was could live communally. Another person said, well, if it's this species, they do not live communally, and so on. So I had to find out so that I could know this information in case I wanted to get another one. Now, they're actually kind of hard to find in reptile shows, for one thing. I rarely see them. I see them pop up here and there, but for the most part, I don't see them all that much. Websites will offer them. I seem to see them. I find them on Pinchers and Pokies every now and then, and but they seem to sell out very, very fast, and then they don't have them for a long time. So, like I said, in the States at least, they're a little bit hard to find, in my opinion. So why a tailless whip scorpion? What attracted me to them in the first place? Some people get attracted to them by Harry Potter movies. If you've seen Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire.
Ugly little beauty. Gorgio. Imperio!
There's one on there, and a lot of people are like, oh wow, I gotta have one of those things. And when they see them in real life and realize that they're actually big like that, that's just a big seller for them. But actually what attracted me was when I first saw them on Insect House on Instagram. And he's always putting them on his face and things like that, like he does with all his insects and arachnids and stuff. And when I first saw them and saw how large they were, I was intrigued by them, and I wanted to find out what they were, and I started looking up stuff. And then the big seller to me was that they are very long-lived, at least those particular species. The females, I believe, can live up to 20 years, which is a good, long time, very similar to the tarantulas. So that's a big seller for me. I like things that are going to stick around for a little while if you take care of them. Although I do have praying mantis that don't live that long, but with those you tend to breed them and then you have more and so on and just keep it going. But yeah, that's just not something that I'm really interested in, keeping things that are very short term. So that was a big seller for me. And the fact that they get so large and they're just these intriguing species, the way they move, the way they crawl, and the way they detect prey with their little whips and so on, that was just so cool to me to see something like that. And of course, there's also the fact that they are not venomous. They don't secrete any noxious smelling stuff. and they don't secrete any poisons, like say a millipede or something to that effect. So those were also big sellers to me. In fact, they're very harmless, and you can wear them on your face, and they won't bug you, they won't mess with you or anything like that. Although they are capable of giving you quite a pinch, even that doesn't hurt that bad. So those were all big winning points for me as far as this thing as a pet. And just the fact that they are so intriguing was, one of the major factors for me. So when it comes to those giants, the giant Tanzanian tailless whip scorpion, you're talking about your African species. They come from Tanzania, Kenya, and they're actually pretty widely distributed throughout Africa. I have a friend who used to live in South Africa, and they were common for him. He used to find them in his shed all the time. So that is, where they come from. And most of the time in the pet trade, you're going to encounter them, and they belong to the Damon genus. Now, you have three main types that you encounter in the hobby, at least here in the United States. And one of those is Damon diadema, and then you have Damon variegatus, and then you have Damon medius. So those three are probably the most common ones that you'll encounter in the pet trade, in the hobby. So which one do you have? How do you know which ones they are? There are two species, the Damon diadema and the Damon medius. They're actually pretty easy to tell apart. But Damon diadema and Damon variegatus are very close. So it's kind of difficult to tell those two apart. And if you don't know what you're looking for, then you might not exactly know what you have. So you have to be careful. And just like I said, with the Asian forest scorpions, you encounter this a lot with your tailless whip scorpions. So let me tell you a little bit about what is the difference between the three. So the first species I'll talk about is Damon diadema. And the reason for that is because I have one and I can actually show you an example of one. But Damon diadema at one point was probably the most common African species that you would find in the hobby, at least here in the United States. That is quickly being replaced by a different species, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I think it has something to do with the changes in the importation laws from Africa or something to that effect. At least that's what I found in my research. But Damon diadema is actually pretty easy to identify. One of the main characteristics of them is that they have the three distinct white bands on their legs. Each one of their legs, not including their pedipalps, have three white bands. Those three white bands are characteristic to the Damon diadema. Characteristic of all amblypigi, they have a tendency to move very methodically, very slow, using their modified legs that look like antennae to sense around them. And they actually have receptors on those antennae, I'll call them, and they can detect different chemical signatures such as prey or maybe another amblypigi. And they have flattened bodies, which makes it very easy for them to slip into crevices, and that's pretty much a defense mechanism where they prefer to hide into nice tight spaces where you can't get in to reach them. But when they feel threatened, they are capable of quick bursts of speed. And notice how the pedipalps will open up like that. That's pretty much their only real defense, is to pinch. So they will threaten with their pedipalps, and if you put your finger in there, they will give you a nice little pinch. So here's an example of Damon medius. Damon medius is quickly replacing the Damon diadema as the most common amblypigi in the hobby here in the United States. So you're more likely to find these in the pet trade than you are Damon diadema. And the differences between Damon diadema and Damon medius is that if you notice on Damon medius, there are only 2 white bands, and they're actually more like white dots. And it fades toward black toward the end. There might be a little bit of a faded band there, but for the most part, it's usually black. And the legs tend to be a little bit more reddish. Another thing that you can see is that the abdominal pattern is just a little bit different than that of Damon diadema. Here's a comparison photo between the two. The one on the left is Damon diadema. Notice the 3 white bands that are very distinct. And on the right is Damon medius. And Damon medius only has the 2 white bands. And again, take a look at the abdomen and you'll see the differences in the abdominal pattern. Another species that is available in the hobby is Damon variegatus. And from what I understand, you're less inclined to find Damon variegatus. I don't know why that is, but from what I've read, they're not as readily available in the hobby as the other 2 species. But they are so close to Damon diadema that it's really difficult to tell them apart. One of the ways that I've found that you could tell them apart is by looking at the spination, which is basically the spines that are located on the trochanter. And the trochanter is the first joint that starts the pedipalps of the tailless whip scorpion. And as you can see in the picture here, the Damon diadema has 3 main large spines that you can see on there, whereas the Damon variegatus only has 1, and then the rest of the spines are relatively small. So I pinch grabbed mine, which I didn't really like doing, but I was careful to be very gentle with it so I could make sure and get some photographs of the trochanter so I can see what the spines look like. And I was happy to see that sure enough, mine has some very large spines located there. And when I looked at the underside, I could definitely see the 3 main spines. And in case you were wondering what the end of their pedipalps looked like, I was actually intrigued by it. I wanted to see what it looked like up close, and you can see it looks like a spiky club, but I was very surprised to see that the end, the very last spine there, actually had some very fine hairs on the end of it, and I assume those are probably for detecting things. They might actually be sensors that can detect chemical signatures, etc. When it comes to keeping these giant tailless whip scorpions, their care is almost pretty much the same. If you notice here, I have mine in a sealable, I guess a dry goods container. And ventilation is not exactly the most important thing with these guys. In fact, they don't really require a whole lot of air movement. If you notice on the front here, I've got some holes that I've drilled out right here. And on the back, I've got another set of holes that I drilled out up here. So I kind of do have a little bit of cross ventilation. I've got lower and higher, but that's pretty much it. Humidity is a little bit more important with these guys. It helps them in their molting and so on, and they tend to live in dark, kind of dank places. So humidity is a little bit higher in the places where they like to live, at least for these guys. Now, it's important to have some cork flats in there. They don't necessarily like the cork rounds as much. And people find that they tend not to go into the cork rounds themselves, but they like the nice flat surfaces. And if you can put more than 1 flat surface, like in this case I have 2 small flat surfaces like that, they like to wedge themselves in between those flat surfaces because they're flat themselves. And that's kind of a nice secure spot for them, is to wedge themselves in between. So let me give you an example here. There you go. And notice how I keep the substrate nice and moist. I've got a little water dish in there for them, and I've got plenty of springtails to clean up whatever mess they leave behind. Sometimes I do get a little bit of mold that builds up in there, especially from a bolus that gets left behind. But the springtails usually will clean that right up and it doesn't get too bad. So if you notice, it is right down here at the bottom in the darker, more moist area. That's where it likes to sit. And kind of neat, when it's up on the shelf, this side is usually the side that's facing out that I can view. They are nocturnal, so they really don't like light at all. And in the mornings when it's just, when it's daylight, I will usually not find it on this side, which is the side that faces outside of the bookshelf that it's in. It will usually be on the darker side, which is behind on this side. But at night, it tends to venture over to this side because it gets dark in the room if I have the lights off and everything. So I can usually see it on this side and I can observe it a lot better. So as far as a pet is concerned, these are strictly nocturnal. You don't see them much out during the day. So they can be a little bit boring unless you're a night owl like me and you like to observe them at night and so on. Another thing that is important is for you to have a place where you can put these things, these cork flats, at a slant. And that's important because when they molt, they hang upside down. And they like to hang upside down off of something that's secure so that they can molt and slough off that molt and then just hang there until they dry off. They will dry relatively quickly, unlike a tarantula that takes a few days, 5 to 7 days. These guys harden up, maybe a few days sooner than that. They still will have kind of a greenish exoskeleton, but after that, it will get their nice gray mottled color and they'll harden right up, and then they're ready to eat right afterward. Eating is another thing. As far as feeding them, I feed mine roaches. I put discoid roaches in there. You can feed yours dubia roaches, crickets, whatever kind of insects, feeder insects. But they're not great eaters. And that's one of the things that I've discovered. They will usually eat pretty readily right after a molt, once they harden up a little bit. But after that, they tend to be a little bit slower as far as eating. So if you like something that's going to eat on demand and you put something on tongs and you want to feed it to them, you're most likely not going to see it, at least not later on, but maybe right after a molt. So, they're not exactly an exciting creature to view as far as, wanting to feed them off the tongs or watch them feed all the time. A lot of times I just put the roaches in there, let them run around on their own. I go to check on them and it might have one in its pincers and it's sitting there eating on it. So, in that aspect, they remind me a lot of scorpions because scorpions have a tendency to be that way. At least mine do. I don't get to see them eat very much. Sometimes I might throw a roach in there and they grab it right away, but for the most part they don't, and then later on I see them eating. Now, as far as sexing your tailless whip scorpion, the African species are actually pretty easy. If you notice on their pedipalps right here, this one is a female and her pedipalps do not extend beyond the first 4 legs there. So that's how you can tell. And this is at a certain point. You won't tell this when they're immature, but as they get bigger, you will definitely notice it. On the males, those pedipalps will get extremely long and they will extend way beyond those front legs. So it's a very easy way to tell whether you have a male or a female. You can even look on the underside and you can see the differences between the two on the underside, but that is the biggest telltale right there. They are sexually dimorphic at a certain point, so it's pretty easy to tell. And that is with all 3 of the African species that I mentioned. Okay, so I am wrapping this video up because it is getting far too long. I'm going to have to break this up into 2 videos. This will be part 1 and part 2 will come up next week. So hopefully I gave you some good information this time, and I've armed you with some valid information that you can use if you are looking for a tailless whip scorpion, and hopefully that makes up for that little bit of disinformation that I gave you on that one video. So it is not my intention to pass on bad information. That was completely accidental. So I always will make up for it if anything like that happens again. So anyway, look for that next episode where I will talk about a different genus of tailless whip scorpions, and I will discuss my 2 tailless whip scorpions that I purchased at Repticon, and that will be the focus of that video. So that wraps it up for me today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. If you want to support this channel, I have a Redbubble store where I sell Tarantula Haven merchandise. Any of the proceeds from the merchandise will go directly to help grow and support this channel. Until next time, keep loving them tarantulas and tailless whip scorpions.